Hi everybody, it's Anna and welcome back to my booktube channel. Today I'm making a video about some books that I've read recently. This is mostly going to be books that I've read in the month of July, but some of them I may have started a little earlier and then read the bulk of that book in July and just share my thoughts about them. So it was actually a really good reading month for me. I ended up reading a lot of books that I really enjoyed. Normally that doesn't happen. Normally I get a book that's really amazing and then I have like a terrible book hangover where every other book is just flat, dull, and tasteless by comparison to the amazingness that I had at the very beginning. But that was not the case this month. I did read a couple of duds, but they were by far the minority. So the first book that I finished in the month of July was a recent release and one of my most anticipated pre-orders, and that is Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. This is very similar to her other novel, Uprooted, that is like a loose retelling inspired by Polish fairy tales and folklore, except this is sort of like loosely inspired by the story of Rumpelstiltskin, but only for the part where you can turn things that aren't gold into gold. That's where the similarity ends. What I really enjoyed about this book, besides just how amazing Naomi Novik's writing is that it was an explicitly Jewish story, and I really appreciated getting to see that actually on the page and explored in a very thoughtful, very insightful way. And that's not something that I see too often in like modern science fiction, fantasy, stuff like that, so I really appreciated getting to see that. I thought that this book was very similar to The Bear and the Nightingale, which I ended up reading last year, and it was just the perfect amount of time had elapsed between when I read that and when I read this, and it scratched an itch I didn't realize that I was feeling. So I was very excited to read this. Next up was a book that I absolutely loved, and that is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This is... oh no, my book got ripped. Oh, cry. This is the first book in a series that I believe is called The Folk of the Air or The People of the Air, something like that, and it is about the Fae. And the Fae in these books are, as the Fae should be, evil, cruel, nasty, mean, and kind of horrible. And this is the story of Jude, who is a human girl who has a half-sister who is half Fae and then another twin sister who is all human. When she's very young, she and both of her sisters get sort of like kidnapped by the Fae because there's history between the Fae girl's father and Jude and her twin's mother, and so they get taken down to like the world of fairy and raised among the Fae as though they're part of the gentry, and this causes a lot of complications for them, especially the ones that are full-blooded mortal, because the Fae tend to look down on them. They use all of the other mortals that are in the area where they live basically just as like slaves, as though they're just mindless automatons there for the Fae's amusement. And Jude decides that, you know, like any young scrappy heroine, she really needs to prove herself. She thinks she's gonna do that by becoming a knight, but this is the story of what happens when she is recruited to be a spy for one of the Fae kings. It's really amazing. It's got lovely little like steamy romantic parts to it that I really enjoyed. So yes, excited for the second book to come out, which I think is coming out in, I want to say January. Let's double check. So the next book is called The Wicked King, and it is going to be coming out on January 8th, 2019. I already pre-ordered it because I am that excited. Okay, next up was a book that I picked up because I thought I was going to enjoy and then ended up very much not enjoying, and that is Save the Date by Morgan Matson. I have read a couple other things by this author before. She tends to write sort of like fun romantic type stories, and I was like, oh, look at how cute this book is. It's got like a little hapless wedding thing going on, and there's this adorable little puppy right here on the cover. Yeah, this book wasn't really that adorable, which is a shame because I really wanted to enjoy it. But I think the moral of this is don't read books about a major life event that you're also going through. Because I'm in the midst of trying to plan a wedding this year. Like, I'm getting married in November of this year, and I think it's just a bad idea for me to read about other people's weddings and what can possibly go wrong, because then my brain is just like, wah, disaster. So this is the story of, what is even her name? Charlie. Charlie is the youngest of a giant family that has an artist mother. She writes this sort of family circus kind of style newspaper comic strip called Grant Central Station that's about like very thinly fictionalized versions of her family and the sort of antics that they get up to. And the family is getting back all together because the oldest girl is getting married to her longtime boyfriend. But as usually happens when you gather a bunch of family members that haven't seen each other in a long time, the kind of like resentments dwelling below the surface come to a head. The thing that kind of bummed me out about this was, first I thought it was going to be more romantic than it was, but it was sort of like Charlie's kind of fallen for this kid who works for the wedding planning company, but all they do is like go drive to the dry cleaners to pick up the groom's suit. And that's like the extent of their alone together time. So there wasn't really much time or space for that to develop. And then again, don't read about this if you're in the middle of planning, but halfway through the wedding reception is when Charlie's parents decide to announce to the entire family and wedding party that they're getting a divorce. And I'm just like, I didn't need this. I didn't need this kind of stress in my brain right now surrounding wedding stuff. So if you're okay with that, read it, but I didn't particularly like it that much. All right, moving on. We seem to have a bit of a trend going on here with the Fae stories, because next book that I read was The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. This came out earlier this year. I'm going to try and give you a chance to see what the cover looks like. It's metallic, and this is also an Owl Crate exclusive cover. I believe that the regular cover for this book is black with the same sort of like gold accents and stuff. So this is a story about a girl named Alice Proserpine. Also check out these end papers, so cute. And she is part of this family that is like legendary for their fairy tale storytelling. Her grandmother wrote this really famous book of fairy tales called The Hazelwood, and Alice doesn't really know anything about her grandmother. Her mom has tried really hard to keep those like parts of the family separate, because her mom really wanted to just like strike out on her own and do her own thing away from the sort of fairy story thing. So this is the story of what happens as Alice decides to go investigate this part of her family. I really did like this book. I thought that it kind of struggled to keep up its momentum about 3/4 of the way through. It kind of like slowed down a little bit and then ramped up a little bit. It rallied at the end, you know, set up for the sequel, which will be coming out eventually. I don't think it has a title yet, so sorry I can't share that, but if I find out, I'll let you know. This book kind of reminded me of the Magicians series by Lev Grossman, because it is a little bit more of an adult take on the, you know, person tries to explore a magical land and find out what if the magic from books is real. It is definitely more on the adult side, even though this is a YA book. So keep that in mind. Okay, next we have a few like comics graphic novel type books that I read this month. We'll start with the longer one, and that is The Best We Could Do by T. Bui. This is a graphic memoir about the author's relationship with her parents, who are refugees from the Vietnam War. They came to the United States after sort of like fleeing the violence and unrest in their home country. And it's written as kind of a series of interviews with both her mom and her dad about their experiences growing up in Vietnam and what the country was like before the war. This was a really different book from what I normally tend to read. Like, I don't really know a whole ton about the Vietnam War. Like, we kind of learn about the global politics and like the military parts of it in school, but not really the human side of it or the human cost of it. And we certainly don't really learn very much about the Vietnamese perspective. So this was a very eye-opening book for me. Obviously, this contains a lot of sensitive materials, so if you're sensitive to, you know, the type of things that tend to accompany war, like violence, sexual violence, hunger, that kind of stuff, just be forewarned of that going into the book. But it was really great and I enjoyed it a lot. On a different note, I also read A Study in Emerald, which is the new graphic novel out by Neil Gaiman, and this is a retelling of the Sherlock Holmes stories, but kind of mashed up with the Cthulhu mythos. Like, Queen Victoria has tentacles, and I have a weakness for everything Cthulhu, so I couldn't really pass this up. Really did have fun with that. I also picked up this adorable little book that I absolutely love and I think should be required reading for all now, and it is A Quick and Easy Guide to They/Them Pronouns by Archie Bongiovanni and Tristan Jimerson. This is basically everything you wanted to know about, like, they/them pronouns, but were afraid to ask or didn't even know you needed to know. A lot of the information in this book was familiar to me since I've kind of already, like, steeped in this conversation and discussion, but I think that it's a really good, like, refresher for everyone. It could be a great introduction to somebody that is still, like, accustoming themselves to the idea of a singular they pronoun in everyday conversation. But it was really good. It was really well put together. It was funny, a quick read, very easy to understand, written in a really accessible way. Check this out if you're at all interested, which you should be because, you know, it's important. And then I don't have the first volume with me because I borrowed it from a friend, but I gave it back to him. But I also read volume 1 of Ladykiller by Joelle Jones. This is kind of a fun story about this woman who is a, like, 1950s housewife by day, and then she's also, like, a hitman. That's, like, her secret life that she's living, is that she is an assassin. And so there's just sort of this delightful art style of, like, a 1950s woman just getting, like, totally covered in blood and guts and stuff like that and being a super spy. I really did like this book a lot. Normally I tend to be a little bit more sensitive to massive amounts of blood in comics, but I don't know why it doesn't really bother me as much in this one. But yeah, blood, lots and lots of blood, so be aware. Okay, and then the last sort of graphic novel which I read is also a graphic memoir, and that is Spinning by Tillie Walden. This book has been on my radar for quite some time to read because I know it is an LGBT graphic novel, and also Tillie Walden just recently won the Eisner Award for Best Graphic Memoir for this book, so I finally decided that I wanted to pick it up and read it. And this is her story of kind of her life as told through the lens of being a really, like, top of her class competitive figure skater as a child. She starts out, like, figure skating under this really, like, austere coach in New Jersey, and things just, like, aren't going really well for her, and her parents end up moving the entire family to Texas for their job. Then she starts out at a new rink. She starts skating with new people, going to a different school, and also, like, coming to terms with the fact that she likes girls and she's, like, not sure what to do at first or how to tell anybody or how to, like, act on this. The illustration style in this book is very sparse. Most of it is this sort of just monotone, like, purple with some amount of shading, but then the use of yellow in this book, especially during the, like, final bit of panels where she's talking about, like, testing for her card and competing, is really, really powerful and impactful. I have heard some people that critiqued this book as being a bit of a bummer, and it kind of is. I wouldn't read this if I was in a good mood and I really wanted to stay in that good mood, but I did think it was a really good book. I thought it was a really important book. I thought it was an interesting take on the young girl coming of age type story because it was very honest about the types of struggles that you have as, like, a young teenager, and the fact that a lot of it can feel very lonely and isolating, especially when you know, are also a young gay teenager and you have something that feels like it's a secret, and then what do you do when people start to find out about that? How do you deal with the fallout and gauging whether people's reactions will be positive or negative? There are some trigger warnings in this book for sexual assault against a minor and just general, like, homophobic stuff. If you're sensitive to that, be aware of it as you go into the book. But it was really good. I would definitely recommend it. And that is Spinning by Tillie Walden. Okay, next to last book right here is a book that I loved so much. It was adorable. I kind of picked this up on a whim because I kept hearing about it. I was like, okay, I don't normally read romance, but I'll give this a shot, and it ended up being one of the better, like, snap decisions I've made, and that is The Kiss Quotient by Helen Hong. And this is the story of Stella, who is a very, like, professionally successful woman. She is autistic. So she has had some trouble with like dating people in the past because she doesn't really like being touched, and she has, you know, the sort of different ways of approaching the world and thinking about the world that sometimes make people like not want to be around her because they think that she's like being awkward or weird or something like that. So the book opens up with Stella's parents basically unequivocally announcing to her that they're ready for grandchildren, and so she needs to like get with it, find a man, and start making babies. But she doesn't really like anybody that she has ever gone out on a date with. So what does she do but decide to hire a person who has sex for a living to teach her how to be better at sex? I thought this premise was kind of ridiculous, but it was handled so wonderfully well. So she calls up this escort, male escort, his name is Michael, to teach her how to be better at sex. And then from there, you know, they have some chemistry. He is a little bit more, he's more willing to engage in like sort of like the conversational parts of romancing somebody, spending time together, easing into things, going slowly. There's a lot of really positive discussion around like consent and like consensual touching and kissing and stuff in this book that I really appreciated reading, because I don't read a ton of romance, but the romance that I have read, I don't really see a lot of that in it. So I appreciated that very much. And then as they sort of start to develop more and more feelings for each other, things start to get complicated as they're, you know, meeting each other's families, and his family doesn't know that he's been an escort to try and help them with some of their money issues. Nobody in Stella's life knows that he's an escort, and then they have sort of their own internal hurdles to overcome before the final, you know, happy ending of the tale. I thought that this story was so adorable and amazing. I squeed many times reading it. Another thing that I should mention is that it is actually also an Own Voices novel of autism and just like Asian American, Asian heritage, that type of thing. The author of the book, in about 2016, when she started writing this character, was also going on like her own journey to being diagnosed with autism as an adult, and then kind of looking back on her life through that frame of reference, she said really gave her a good window and insight into writing the character of Stella. I know that she's going to be writing a new book. It comes out in May of 2019. Why do we have to wait so long for it to come out? I can't wait. I can't wait. It was so good. So good. Okay. And then the last book, but not least, is one that I'm currently reading, but I'm expecting to finish by the end of the month. And that is Deep Roots by Ruthanna Emrys. This is the sequel to Winter Tides, which I read earlier this year. It is, again, another reimagining of Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos, but told from the perspective of the people that he kind of leaves out or marginalizes or otherwise pushes to the side. So this picks up where Winter Tides left off. Aphra and company are still trying to deal with the fact that the FBI is suspicious of the sort of like Cthulhu mythos folks, because they're, you know, in the midst of the Red Scare and paranoia that everyone is going to be a Russian spy. We are meeting more of the sort of like old ones and outer ones and the type of creatures from the Lovecraft universe that take human minds as kind of symbiotes. And I'm really enjoying this. My camera is about to run out of battery, so I'm gonna wrap it up really quick. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up or leave a comment down below so we can get a conversation started in the comments. Also, if you wouldn't mind hitting the subscribe button, that would be totally lovely. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.